my presentation and my research is on Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon as places of transcendence and negotiated identities. I will start with a quote from one of the websites that I'm analyzing, one of the Facebook pages that I'm analyzing within this research. In the Facebook page, they posted a question asking camps residents, what do they think a camp is? And one of the answers was, a camp is a temporary alternative homeland. It is the closest station, yet the farthest on the way to return. It was one of the answers. And the picture shows a highly discursive reality within the camps, and it's one of the basis of this research because everything within a refugee camp in Lebanon is a message used by the refugee. So the objective in general is to analyze the identity created within the Palestinian refugee camps and its cultural forms, considering the specific historical and socio-political situation. I argue that the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon form a cultural third space. The third space is a concept analyzed and created by Homi Bhabha. And this third space rejects the boundaries formed by the identity binaries and create a hybrid identity that is in the realm of the beyond. And I will explain that later. The spaces of interstices, that's what Homi Bhabha calls them, or what we can say places of intervention, cultural intervention, were created by the reality of discrimination and non-recognition that the Palestinian refugees live in, and constitute the ground on which an agency of empowerment is located, which is a struggle for mutual recognition, I argue. The reality of this third space is mediated through cultural communication forms that build on the traditional mnemonic and commemoration practices of the camps. And here I would like to just point out that the understanding of the mnemonic and commemoration practices, I built it on an analysis of these work by the prominent scholars working on them, since I didn't do fieldwork. So it's the work of Diana Allan, Rosemary Sayer, and Dina Matar and Laleh Khalili are the scholars working on mnemonic practices in the camp. So methodology, theoretical framework, Homi Bhabha, scholarly literature on commemoration and mnemonic practices, and scholarly literature on Palestinian identity, and the analysis of two youth camp-based Facebook pages. Camp G. Camp G is a pun, say I'm a camp person, like I belong to a camp. It's like Lebanese, but Camp G, or we say Palestinian. It's at pencil camps. I provide a very brief historical overview, knowing that the history of Palestinians and Palestinian refugees is a very complicated and contested history. So I'll try to be brief as much as I can. So the Palestinian refugee problem was started after the displacement of almost 800,000 Palestinian indigenous people and the destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages in the war of 1948, which created one of the biggest refugee problems of the 20th century. By 1948, Lebanon had received over 100,000 Palestinian refugees. In Lebanon, Palestinian refugees were directly perceived as a direct threat to an already fragile sectarian balance. They constituted a Sunni majority within a Maronite hegemonic political system, which directly put a threat to the way a sectarian balance is created in the country. In 1950, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency was established, and it was mandated to assist the refugees. They provided shelter, social services, and humanitarian assistance. UNRWA still till today manages all the affairs related to Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. However, the reception of UNRWA in the first part of the crisis was highly criticized by Palestinians because it was seen as an act of realizing their expulsion instead of exerting international effort for their return. They faced very tough socioeconomic conditions in the camp until like the 70s and 80s. Before the 70s and 80s, they were still in tents. Roofs were prohibited by state control over any construction that means permanent residency. So they were faced by very tough economic conditions. They were denied citizenship and defined by law in Lebanon as foreigners. They were granted infinite residency but obliged to apply for work permits and restricted from traveling without state permission. Today, Lebanon hosts almost 100,000 Palestinians that are registered by UNRWA, out of which still 53 reside in the 12 official refugee camps in the country. The Cairo Agreement of 1969 between the Lebanese state and the Palestinian Authority recognized Palestinian right to resistance and sovereignty over camps after major conflicts within Lebanon between the Palestinians and the military due to the increased Arab nationalist pressure, and so they pressured the Lebanese authorities to recognize the right for Palestinian resistance from Lebanon. So they started operating from Lebanon, the Lebanese borders, into the Israeli state. The Israeli invasion of Beirut and the expulsion of Palestinian leadership in 1982 from the camps changed massively the type of life in the camp and the political identity in the camp, as suddenly the Palestinians in the camp were no longer represented by any official authority, not the Lebanese, not the Palestinian. And the institutionalization of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Lebanon was expelled from all the country. The major event that I'm basing my analysis of is the 1993 Oslo Accord between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli authorities. Within the Accord, the Palestinian Authority kind of dropped the right of return in return of the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And the right, when they dropped the right of return of Palestinians, the Palestinians in the camps of Lebanon officially became stateless. They don't belong to the country of Lebanon. They're denied nationness, and all the factions in Lebanon approved that a permanent settlement is impossible for Palestinians in Lebanon, and a return to 1948 land became also impossible, so they became officially stateless. And now, the points I'm mentioning now are all the result of an analysis that go back and forth from literature and data from the Facebook pages. So after the Oslo Accord, the Palestinians of Lebanon became a stateless population, and it's created subject that lives between two cultures and two spatial realities: the culture of Lebanon and the culture of Palestine, and the reality of the homeland and the reality of exile. Camps became a place of negotiated identity, of an extremely discursive reality that builds on the memories of the past, lives in a continuously reconstructed present, and hopes for a return to a homeland that is only maintained now through memory, since we're already in the third generation of Nakba survivors. I argue that Palestinian I based my analysis on the fact that Palestinian identity is a product of a complex history, and it makes it self-evident that the multitude of identities are under what it means to be Palestinian. So there's no clear-cut definition of what a Palestinian identity means or might mean. After the Oslo Accord, the Palestinians of Lebanon felt abandoned by the Palestinian Authority and found themselves in a new reality that is extremely insecure. After this, the traditional commemoration practices portrayed by the scholars I mentioned, and especially Lawi Khalili, remained relevant, but however, new layers were added. And by traditional commemoration practices, I will just mention a few examples, naming Camp Street in the names of the original villages in Palestine, pictures of martyrs, commemoration of events like the Balfour Declaration, the 1948 Nakba, the events of creation of the PLO, and the act of orally telling the history of the Palestinian people. Prior to 1982, referral to and prior to the Oslo Agreement, referral to return was associated with active revolutionary present acts. However, after the abandonment and the Oslo Agreement, the return to the homeland is portrayed in an emotional, abstract manner. So they will no longer portray the return as a natural act that is actively pursued. Reassuring, they try, in the data I analyzed, they try to reassure their belonging to the Palestinian polity, but at the same time, the camp became a central place of how they identify their existence. Before, the camp was only a transitory phase. Now it became a central part of their identity. The issues within the camps became also of centrality. So the advocacy for a better life, the demand for more recognition became of centrality. And they started calling for Palestinian unity and more attention to the camp. And finally, the life in the camps is by itself portrayed in these forms as an act of resistance. The fact that they are still there and they are still fighting for their return or for their recognition is portrayed as an act of resistance. Now, going back to theory, I placed the discussion of the identity within Palestinian camp within the context of post-colonial literature, acknowledging that the revision of Palestinian history through the account of Palestinians and not through Western account of what happened in Palestine only started within the post-colonial discipline. Understanding the identity, I analyzed the identity of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon within the post-Oslo Agreement period within the framework of Baba's cultural difference and third space theory. I argue through Baba's theory that the reality of unrecognition and the struggle for belonging created an interstitial space through which new forms of identification emerge. In the articulation of this cultural difference, the experiences of nationless community interest and cultural value became renegotiated. So new definitions of these concepts were created, and this space of negotiation is what is situated in what Homi Baba describes as the realm of the beyond, a liminal space that refutes the binary system through which cultural identities are usually identified. And by binary system, I mean, for example, the binary system of being defined as Lebanese versus Palestinian, as Arab versus Jew, as refugee versus non-refugee, as 1948 versus 1967 Palestinians. They refute all of these binaries, and they say that we have our own special identity that is not described within any of these binaries. And try to be brief. I argue that within these the space of the beyond, this third space where the act of resistance is starting to emerge, and the resistance of these particular this particular identity is by the claim of mutual recognition and trying to just ask the Palestinian Authority, the Lebanese Authority, and the international community to recognize their very specific situation. Very fast. Examples from the website I analyzed. These are examples of posts that show how the traditional commemoration practices persist. So on the walls of the camps, a free Palestine is written. This is an elder from the camps showing his Palestinian identity card from pre-1948, saying that we do belong to this land. And here's an event by the elders of one of the refugee camps to preserve the traditional heritage and food of Palestine. Return as an emotional abstract demand. This is a post about Camp G. The website portrays faces from the camps. So here's the guy says that I get dressed to be prepared to meet my lover. And by my lover, I mean Palestine. Yes, Palestine is my lover. So that's what I meant by an emotional abstract demand of return. And here it's a band. It's a kind of a traditional dancing a group that was created in a camp. Its name is The Dream of a Refugee, and they say that they threw him out of all the ports. They took his lover, and they called him a refugee. Demanding recognition. This they tell the story of a guy that has a university degree but cannot work because the Lebanese state prohibits him as a Palestinian to work in 73 professions. So it's an indirect demand for inclusion. And here's a very long post about the status of UNRWA in Lebanon. Finally, the portrayal of life in camp. This is a post about how you can overcome the shortages in electricity by lighting your house with orange. And the other post is it says, is it from the same age of the Nakba or younger? Asking people about the age of the Shatila camp in Lebanon. So the camp became a new reality of this identity. And this guy says that he was a fighter in 1986, but in 2012 he opened a garage because he felt that the camp needs him. So we're used to the discourse of Palestine needs us, but now the camp became the other territory where we belong. So, concluding very brief, the Oslo Agreement resulted in the isolation of the refugees in Lebanon from the national identity of Palestinians. They have thus become a minority that's struggling for recognition in a highly transnational context. Palestinians of the camp acknowledge the complexity of their situation, and they do not communicate any clear suggestion for a solution. They, however, demand recognition from international actors, Lebanese state, and Palestinian Authority. What we identified at the third space is translated in the communication of specific cultural identity that is continuously resisting the existing binaries, generating their own cultural hybridity. Thank you.